does it mean to regenerate? The reemergence of the concept of regeneration in our culture is a hot topic. From producers to products, legislation to certifications, celebrities to students, there's no shortage of passionate perspectives. Welcome to Regen Circle. I'm Paige Fay, and on this show, we're here to explore the reemergence of regenerative concepts and practices and their impact on ecosystems and culture. If you like what you hear, take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Welcome to the Circle. Well, hello, this is Paige Fay from Regen Circle, and I'm here with Robby Sansom, who is the co-founder and CEO of Force of Nature Foods. And Force of Nature works with farmers and ranchers, primarily ranchers, to source regenerative cattle, so grass-fed beef and chicken and bison as well, so not just cattle, but all forms of livestock. And we're here today at the What Shall We Do conference, talking about all things regenerative farming, restorative land work. And I'm excited to speak with Robby today. So thank you, Robby, for speaking with me.
Thanks for having me.
So my first question that I ask any guest is, what is your definition of regenerative? How would you define it?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think there's really no simple answer. And it's interesting what you might be inspired by in the moment when you're asked. I know yesterday you mentioned the conference. There was a panelist that pointed to the industrial system and the challenges of it as being a system that ignores the unintended consequences that it creates, right? And the challenge and why we are focused on regenerative agriculture is because there are so many unintended consequences, whether it be to our health, whether it be to the land bases that produce and nourish us through the food that it creates, whether it be to social issues and communities all across the planet, to our oceans, and pollinators, and on and on and on and on. And ultimately what regenerative agriculture is it's shifting the script around to focusing on food production systems that don't ignore the unintended consequences, but celebrate the consequences and produce food and the image of these natural systems that gave us this fertility, that gave us this nourishment, that gave us this balance and harmony in life, and seeing how much of that wisdom we can deploy as we farm row crops, as we raise livestock animals, and as we do both of those things in a way that helps reverse and mitigate many of the challenges that I just laid out. But what most folks don't realize is many of those challenges come from the food production system. So we want to address them through these changes, through these practices that are regenerative.
Yeah. And in a world where we're so disconnected from our food system, right? Like we are so entrenched in fast food and we have such complex food supply chains. How would you talk about regenerative products or regenerative agriculture or natural systems to a layman, someone that maybe doesn't have a lot of experience with natural systems, doesn't spend a ton of time in nature? How would you talk about the regenerative movement to them?
Yeah, I think it's difficult sometimes to engage with people in a way when it's easy to talk over people's heads, right? And to lose them when you get into these really complex, not just complicated, but complex because of all the relationships. And I think the truth is there's two juxtaposing realities here. One is the reality of the food system that they're currently a part of and they're currently supporting through their purchasing behavior and the signals that they send saying, I'm okay with this. And the truth behind that. And the truth is that is a system that is degrading land, that is robbing communities of hope, that is poisoning our body, that is poisoning the environment, that is cruel in so many ways to so many stakeholders. And I don't think the average person even understands that. And so I think when you create awareness that the system that they're involved in isn't the system that they understand it to be. It's the beautiful images you see on packages, the beautiful stories you see told, the taglines of these large mega businesses don't really tell the truth behind that food. And with regenerative in these systems, it truly is the manifestation of what the consumer wants, right? The farmer with the different species on their land, growing animals in conjunction with plants, and again, leveraging that wisdom from nature that we've known through the millennia to be keystone in our own health and vitality and communities. I think it's difficult maybe to educate on all that nuance, but if you can help create a connection, what you're already looking for, what you already desire, what you already even hope for and dream of exists. And it's in these sorts of systems as the counter to the system that has led us to this point where we have these global crises. We have, you know, fertility rates declining. We have so many other things that we constantly talk about, and we don't recognize, again, that they point back to the system that is failing us every day, as we wear blinders, unaware of the abuse that we are incurring.
Right. And so what do you think about, food scarcity and food insecurity, especially within our country? And so, food accessibility is really challenging in many parts of the country. And so I was really inspired by your and Taylor Collins, the founder of your other co-founder of Force of Nature, your discussion around comparing Whole Foods and the cost of a whole food meal to the cost of a fast food meal, and how that, ounce for ounce, it was actually much more efficient, not only nutritionally, but financially, to source, regenerative meat and vegetables. However, many parts of the country are still don't even have access to those products. And so I'm just curious, from a macro view, what's your perspective on that? And what do you think is the role of food companies, the role of government, to start to make a shift in that, to make those foods more accessible?
Yeah, I think, thank you for referencing that podcast, because I think one of the things we talk about on there is sort of the premise that food with a higher sticker price at the grocery store is more expensive, and how we perceive that. And I think that there's a layer of conditioning that occurs prior to that moment of truth at the shelf, where we begin to associate what's expensive with what's not expensive, right? And I think one of the key examples that we talk about is our most expensive beef product sounds expensive to the consumer. We're told it's expensive, but when I compare it to Ruffles potato chips, we're 55 cents an ounce, and Ruffles are $1.19 an ounce.
Yep.
And nobody looks at a potato chip as being expensive. And so where do these ideas come from? And so I think part of it starts with creating the recognition that reality exists, that food shouldn't be cheap, it should be valuable, and it should be available as well. And I think we have so much money, energy, political resource, and regulation going into promoting a system that creates cheapness in the absence of value, and then that permeates into these food deserts, or even the what are they called, food swamps, where you have densely populated areas, but you can't actually gain access to where there is nutritious food. And I think if it, from a system level, from a political level, from a community level, if we began to actually peel back some of that conditioning and open our eyes to some of the realities of food and where it comes from, we could very easily address that access challenge, in addition to the awareness of the affordability component. I don't think this should be food for the elites. I don't think it should be restricted to the people with the educational opportunities that make them more aware to be proactive in their pursuits. I think that we should take it as an opportunity and make it incumbent upon us to reach out to people, to bring them along in this journey, both in the forms of affordability, access, but then also awareness and education.
Yeah, beautiful. It's important. I think it's a layered, multifaceted approach. Certainly one brand can't do all the heavy lifting, but you guys do have a strong community, and I think an opportunity to raise your voice and meet a lot of people. I do think the government plays a big role in this.
Yeah,
as well.
the Farm Bill, so many things.
Yeah. What is your guys' perspective on the upcoming Farm Bill, and are you doing any work or partnering with any organizations?
I think the two organizations that I know of doing the most work, and there's so many, and this is one of the things that we face in this industry, is there's so much potential and from at a global level, but it's disparate. And so creating this unification, how do we unite? I know Regenerative America, associated with Kiss the Ground, they're doing great work on policy. I know Food Fix, Mark Hyman's associated with that group. They're working on it. Policy, regulation, this isn't my strength.
Sure.
I'm trying. What we do is educate and mobilize consumers to sort of be that uniting force to help overcome the incumbent powers. But the Farm Bill needs to change. It's clearly a Farm Bill that's not promoting health and wellness or nutrition. 1800, 60% of our nation was farmers. 1900, 30% of our nation was farmers. Now it's probably 3%. It's not creating hope in communities. We are not going to have families and neighbors producing our food in the future. It will be agribusinesses, whichever placed agriculture. And so we need a farm bill that is promoting solutions. We need a farm bill that's paying attention, again, to the unintended consequences of the food system, and that is serving the people and not the profit interests of some of the many corporate organizations that have captured our food system.
The last topic of conversation I wanted to cover with you is just sort of the stigma of meat and livestock as the worst producers of greenhouse gases, and in many cases, at least in industrial livestock and agriculture, they are the worst producers in many cases of greenhouse gases. However, the way in which you all are utilizing livestock and the different grazing methods, high density grazing and different, are known to sequester carbon. What are you guys doing to sort of combat the stigma against meat as the least environmentally friendly choice on the plate, and what do you just see in that movement and that conversation with consumers and community?
Yeah, it's a huge topic. I think, put simply, we're trying to create awareness to the reality behind some of these talking points, and I think and empower the consumer to make better choices and better judgment calls. It's funny. There was actually a research report that came out, I think, last week, a study done and published that demonstrated that enteric emissions, or methane belching, in wildlife is exactly consistent with, again, the greenhouse gas emissions from livestock. And so even if we were to remove livestock from land and rewild that land, it would then be replaced by wildlife, which would have the exact same carbon footprint from an enteric emission, from a belching perspective, from a methane perspective, as the livestock. And so, and again, then you can, that's an interesting anecdote, right? But you can point back to through the ages and look back to when there was more bison here, when there was more antelope, when there was more deer. Again, these cycles of greenhouse gases, as we call them, are natural. There's a carbon cycle, and animals have always been a part of it, and they've always been helping to stimulate activity in the rhizosphere, and then within plants that are sequestering carbon, and they're emitting carbon in the form of CH4 or CO2, and that cycle has existed. There is a balance there. We are all carbon-based life. The majority of our body that's not water is carbon. Carbon isn't our enemy, right? When I hear these people talking about building factories that sequester carbon into bricks, it terrifies me, because we have a carbon issue, not in our atmosphere as much as in our soil. We are lacking carbon in our soil that we need to create functioning, healthy ecosystems, which drive natural processes, which create food, and so on and so forth. And again, bringing it back to the question, animals have always been keystone to those processes, meaning they have a disproportionate and positive impact relative to their numbers on the land. They are a driver, they're a catalyst for the essential things that happen. And so, as in the last few years, as this conversation has been amplified, and the discourse has, never been around meat has never been more commonplace than it is now, and largely around this idea of plant-based being celebrated, and plant-based being celebrated, and plant-based getting a free pass. No, there are awful, horrible, scourge on the earth type things that commonly and pervasively come from plant-based systems done wrong, the worst examples of those systems. Much like the worst example of animal-based systems, absolutely empirically has terrible consequences, not just on welfare, not just on land, but on human health and in so many other areas. And so we have to be careful we don't villainize, we don't take the worst case example of something that deserves to be called what it is and assign it to the whole, whether that be animal-based systems, whether that be plant-based systems. And I think what we're trying to promote with Force of Nature, and again with this regenerative movement that we're only a small part of, is recognizing that there aren't plant-only systems or animal-only systems and healthy systems. There are planet-based systems that are healthy, thriving ecosystems, which require plants and animals to harmonize and interact in the way that they've done, again, through the ages for millions and billions of years, to promote nutrition and fertility and the very things that we all hope to see in the world.
And I think, it's also about biodiversity of that livestock, right, and those animals, because we've sort of replaced the biodiversity of thousands and millions of species with cows and one type of cow that produce either the most dairy or the most, and I think what you're speaking to is like, you all sell venison, you all sell different things, and your practices allow other species to exist on the land, which I think is another really critical component that's often, I think, less talked about within the regenerative agriculture movement. There's talk about water and tilling and plants, but biodiversity often gets, left off the table in some ways.
It's funny. Well, biodiversity is one of the 5 key principles or the 6 key principles of regenerative agriculture. So the Where Hope Goes podcast, we have the next episode to get released will be on the principles of soil health, and we'll talk about that. But I think that's a good example, in the typical industrial monocrop plant-based system, you're tilling and spraying. Again, it's an attack. It's warfare on life to promote the singular form. And what people don't realize is there's 1 billion sentient life forms in the form of insects per acre of healthy land. 1 billion per acre. And I always get these big numbers and I can't conceptualize them. So I was talking to Kate Kavanaugh. We were doing some back of the napkin math. If you were to stack 1 billion sheets of paper on top of each other, it would be 300,000 feet tall. And that's the significant, that's the profound, incredible reality of the life on the land and that biodiversity. Every single one of those small life forms that we may take for granted has an important role. There's so many complicated and complex layers to all of this that, again, we should be we should be discontinuing and discouraging a system that ignores that and that challenges it and degrades it, and we should be promoting systems that celebrate it and allow all of, we don't have to understand it, we just have to appreciate it and let it be.
Thank you. Well, I think that's a beautiful note to end on, unless there's anything else that you want to share.
Oh, I promised you I'd help you keep it under 20 minutes or so, and that is not my strength, so.
I think we did it. Well, maybe this will be the shortest podcast, video interview you've ever done, which I'll take that.
Yes, my team will be impressed.
Fantastic. Well, Robby, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Again, I really appreciate what you're doing as well.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review the show. And if you want to learn more about how to get involved with the Circle, visit us at our website or on social media. We're always looking for like-minded people to connect with.